How are we doing? Okay, we have to time this up with the live stream, I take it. I think we have just a couple more people coming in here. All right. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm very excited about this event. My name is Mose Bouchel, and I am a energy environment correspondent here at KUT 90.5. And I also host a podcast called The Disconnect, Power, Politics, and the Texas Blackout. This is a project that we started here at the station right after the big Texas blackout of 2021, which, as you are probably aware, was just happened about 2 years ago, just a little earlier this month, 2 years ago, actually. I'm curious, how many people in the room here were here for that? Just a show of hands. So, I mean, we are dealing with a crowd here then who is intimately familiar with that energy crisis and its aftermath. Many people here lose power themselves. Yeah, okay. So when we're talking about this stuff, we're talking about things that we all understand, I think, very viscerally the importance of then. And since then, of course, it seems like these issues have only just increased, both in the news and then also for us here in the Austin community. I mean, just earlier this month, we had another mass power outage due again to extreme weather. This one more of a localized event, but no less difficult for people that were without power again for days. These are the things we're going to be talking about here today. We're going to talk about the challenges faced by the energy system, especially in the context of extreme weather and the reality of increasing extreme weather events. This event tonight is the Texas Grid Under Pressure, and it is a partnership with the Texas Science Festival here at UT Austin. So I'd like to thank everybody at UT that partnered here with us at KUT to help put this together. It was definitely a team effort, and I love seeing this kind of thing happen here. So we're going to be talking about some technical stuff and some kind of sciencey stuff, and Lord help us, maybe even some issues of energy finance and the energy markets. So it's going to get kind of technical maybe at times. And so I thought it'd be a good idea to open this up with a quick little lesson in how the power grid actually operates. And we wanted to do this without making it too confusing and keeping it kind of entertaining. And so we're thinking about ways to do this, and this is what we've come across here in our efforts to engage you with this content. I think the first thing that I want you to understand is that the power grid has a sound. Okay, this is the sound, and it's not a very pretty sound. This is the sound of 60 hertz, right? This is the cycle. This is that energy runs along transmission lines. It's the frequency of the grid, right? You can think about it, if you will, kind of as the heartbeat, the beat of the power grid. But like I said, we don't want to hear this whole time, so we're going to turn it off. We thought instead it would be much more useful to think of this beat like a drummer. So this is Jake Perlman here. Hi, Jake. He's going to play the grid for us. So, Jake, if you wouldn't mind, thank you. Okay. So this frequency, right, this beat is very important. And if it doesn't keep steady, as Jake will show us here, very bad things happen. And that's the reason that we have grid operators. Okay, in Texas, you might have heard of our grid operator. It's a group called the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. It's called ERCOT. It is beloved across the state. Okay, seriously though, I mean, I do think ERCOT is kind of misunderstood. ERCOT's main job, really, its main job is to keep this beat steady. It would like very much to make sure that everyone gets power all the time, but even beyond that, its main job is to make sure that this beat stays steady. And it does that by balancing two things. It does that by balancing electricity supply and electricity demand, okay? those two things need to stay in sync on the grid to keep the beat steady. If you think about it, I've been talking about like toasters, television sets, air conditioning units, heaters, big factories, right? On one side, all the things that are switching off and on, getting power from the grid. On the other side, you have power plants, you have wind farms, solar farms, maybe battery storage, all of these things kept in perfect balance in order to keep this beat steady on the grid constantly. It's really quite an undertaking, but it's very important because if that does not stay balanced, very bad things happen. So let's say, for example, more energy starts coming on the system than we need. You see what happens here? This beat, this frequency, this beat starts speeding up, okay? Now let's put a little bit more on there. Let's put a little bit more. Let's see what Jake can do for us here. I'm going to put even more. You got it, Jake? You can keep going? Yeah. This is actually scary stuff because if it keeps going like this, things start actually breaking down, right? And if it keeps getting more and more and more, the grid starts breaking down. I'm talking about those same factories, those transmission lines, those substations. And in a worst case scenario, well, that's what they call a catastrophic grid failure, okay? And that means that the entire grid is basically fried, right? And this is actually an outcome that's even worse than what we experienced 2 years ago. This is something in which, a circumstance in which you wouldn't have power, and they said back then it could take days, even weeks, to get it back up and running again. So that was a fun little example, but it's actually not what usually happens to cause what we know as blackouts, rolling blackouts. Typically, that is actually caused by the other thing that's caused by not enough power on the energy grid. And that can happen in different ways. That can happen if demand goes way up, but we don't have the supply to meet it. Or it can happen if supply just kind of craters out, drops, so we can't meet demand. So imagine it's Valentine's Day 2021. The electrons across the state are flowing, everyone's getting power, but it's getting colder, okay? People start turning on their heaters. And this frequency, this beat, it starts to slow, it starts to get kind of wobbly. Okay, but we got an answer for that, right? To fix that, grid operator puts on a little bit more power online, okay? And it works, all right? This is the way things are supposed to work. The balance is restored. Except, in this case, this very same weather, this very same extreme weather that is driving up that energy demand, it's also wreaking havoc on the state's energy system, okay? Power plants are starting to shut down in the cold. The natural gas supply line that feeds them also stops working in the cold. Supply starts to falter right when people need it most, and the grid starts to get shaky again, getting real shaky. So what do you do in this situation, okay? There's no more electricity to put online, but you need to balance that supply and demand, or the entire thing is going to crash like we just illustrated. Well, in this case, there's only one thing that you can do. At this point, 2 years ago, for ERCOT, it meant cutting people's power. You had to reduce that demand. So let's say, and I'm just making this number up, let's say they start by cutting electricity to 1 million people. Okay, well, the beat's starting up again. So this is good news for the grid. It's not good news for those people, not at all. But the power grid is suddenly starting to move again. You suddenly got some energy, the balance restored, it's flowing. But the problem is that more supply is breaking down, more power plants are breaking down. Supply starts dropping again. So what you do is you cut power to, we'll say, another 1 million people. Again, just making that number up. Starts to work again. Things start to look good again. But the problem is, the night after Valentine's Day, this keeps happening. Every time they try to achieve this balance, it starts getting kind of shaky again, starts slowing down. And eventually, late that night, really early in that morning, we start getting close to that catastrophic meltdown, that catastrophic grid failure. And so in what sounded kind of like a last-ditch effort, they ordered cuts to millions and millions more people, some of you among them. And it works, okay? The balance is restored. The beat gets steady. But by this point, it will only stay that way if, and this is a real number, around 11 million people are left in the dark. And for days, that's what happened. Okay, thank you, Jake. All right. I think that worked okay. Okay. So there were a couple of reasons that we did this. One was to give a little, like I said, intro, Power Grid 101, and maybe an oversimplification. We can hear about that from the panelists, but I do think it worked pretty well. The other thing is that it really lays out the challenge that we meet with extreme weather. You know, you don't always just plan for an energy grid that works on a normal day. You plan for one that works on the worst day. And in the context of climate change, this becomes a much more complicated proposition. We're dealing now with an aging energy infrastructure, the threat of increased extreme weather events, and also the possibility, well, I should say the reality, of new technologies coming online and integrating into our energy system. And trying to balance all those things are exactly what we're here to talk about with our panelists today. So I'll just sit down over here after I move this, and we will welcome them to the stage. Okay, y'all, please, come on up. Thank you so much. Probably one of the longest intros you've had to wait through before. I hope it was at least entertaining. Okay, well. All right, well, I'll start here right to my left. This is Allison Silverstein. And if you've listened to any of my reporting or listened to paid attention to power grid issues in Texas, you have likely heard her name before. She's worked for decades in the world of energy regulation and policy, including as a senior advisor at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. She also worked for the Public Utility Commission of Texas. So just really deep experience. She's now an independent consultant working on issues of the ERCOT market redesign. That's that financial part I kind of alluded to earlier. And she also is on the board of the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. Thank you so much for being here, Allison. Next to Allison, Erica Biersbach. She is responsible for Austin Energy's physical and financial power portfolio, which sounds like quite a lot for one person to me. Before coming to Austin, or Austin Energy, I should say, she handled energy risk management at Duke Energy Trading and Marketing and at Enron Capital and Trade. And I'm going to say this right now, if you think that the science of the grid is complicated, wait until you hear about this financial stuff, because it's completely indecipherable, even to me still sometimes, after years of reporting on that. So hopefully maybe you can help us cut through some of that and understand some of that a little bit better. Thank you very much, Erica. And finally, we have Dev Niyogi. He's a professor at UT's Jackson School of Geosciences and Cockrell School of Engineering. He's a member of the research team with UT's Planet Texas 2050, which is an initiative here at UT to look at solutions to tackle resilience and mitigation in extreme weather impacts in Texas. And I was also really interested to learn that years ago, he also, for quite a while, was the state climatologist for the state of Indiana. Sounds like an interesting and challenging job. And I'm hoping to learn more about the climate part of this from Dev. And so, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I've switched up some of these questions. And in the context of this 2-year anniversary of the big Texas blackout, I guess I'll begin actually with Allison. Allison, is the Texas power grid fixed?
Kinda.
Okay, explain.
There are. That's right. Erica, who has a stake in this, wants me to say it's perfect. Nothing's perfect. Thank you. So there are things that are better. Things that are better mostly are that many of the power plants that broke during Winter Storm Uri because of very cold temperatures and high moist winds and icing are, quote, winterized, which means that they should be performing better. Unfortunately, winterization didn't fix everything. We still had 15 or 20,000 megawatts of gas plants that failed during Winter Storm Elliott at the start of February. So winterization is a great idea for power plants. if you have not winterized your gas supply system, having your power plants be better able to perform in cold weather isn't good enough. We also, and ERCOT has adopted a number of operating practices to make it easier to enable them to keep the grid farther from that point of collapse by having more power plants online all the time to be ready for an emergency, and by having more demand from places like crypto miners and large industrial customers that can cut their load at the last minute so that you and I don't have to sit in the dark as a panic measure. But some of the things that, and ERCOT, under the PUC's, Public Utility Commission's orders, is paying truckloads more for energy purchases, which means that all of our electric bills are higher. And the purpose of paying more money is to make sure that, to encourage more generators to be available. That's a good thing. And certainly more generators are available. The bad news is we haven't winterized the gas system, as I mentioned. We haven't figured out how to winterize a coal pile yet. And we have not winterized the most important thing, which is our homes and businesses. We have not spent any money meaningfully on energy efficiency to protect customers from the consequences of grid failure and to reduce the level of demand that we have.
I've read a lot of reports on this, and there's been plenty of analysis around it. And I guess I thought it was an interesting question to start off with because it might mean different things to different people. But my understanding is, while we are in a better place in terms of reliability than we were 2 years ago, there's still a great likelihood, a great probability that if we were confronted with a similar, and this is maybe what the question, what does that question mean? If we encountered a storm of a similar magnitude, right, then we would likely still have power failures in the state. We would likely still have a deficiency of energy by analysis I've read from FERC and from other sources. I don't know, Erica, do you think that's a fair assessment?
I don't know. There's a lot of lessons learned from Winter Storm Uri, especially in the gas industry, as far as some of the compressors and different parts of that chain having backup generation. The pipelines that did have backup generation were there. The ones that didn't weren't. Something as as small as being on a critical load or making sure they don't get turned off at a certain degree. So if temperatures go below 30 degrees, then that part of the infrastructure would not be touched. So things like that, I think, would help minimize what happened. I mean, we had 90% of all of the gas in the West shut in. That's unprecedented. I mean, that was something that really. I don't think anyone was really expecting how long that gas would be shut in. So I think, one of the things we did here, and Allison alludes to this, there is a frustrating part where, who regulates the gas industry here in Texas and how they self-regulate. And so we have had some of that activity brought, kind of put their feet to the fire. But I think it's the consumers, it's the end users that need to be pushing for them to be a better player in our markets because they are a very, very important part of what we do every day to keep the grid stable. Other than that, then also aside from that, there was some very, we had a nuke plant go down. I mean, that was something that, again, never would have expected that to happen. There has been a huge processes that have been redone and revamped and changed. So a lot of that work, has happened. It is continuing to happen. It makes it, more. It makes it harder, but that's what we should be doing: is be more. Competent when we are bringing these assets to market. So we need to have that expectation from these assets. So I don't know if it would be as bad. Every situation has a certain uniqueness that I think the important thing is that these climate events are going to continue to happen, and we need to be ready for them.
Yeah,
and
I want to get Dev. I want to get Dev on that, but I also just want to go back to 2 points. First. maybe not as bad, but even we've heard testimony from the current head of ERCOT that there's still a possibility of a problem in a highly extreme weather event. And I also wanted to just clarify something you said, because you made reference to the body that regulates oil and gas in Texas, and that's the Railroad Commission of Texas, which is different from the Public Utility Commission. And this agency does have a reputation for, you made reference to self-regulating. I mean, our oil and gas industry in Texas does not have nearly the same level of scrutiny or regulation as the electric industry, the utilities industry does, or the transmission industry. And that makes it difficult to even know what exactly has been accomplished or not accomplished, at least for someone like me, whose job is to try to figure these things out. It is essentially a system of self-regulation that extends to some degree even to the financial side of things. I mean, in Texas, we had a big problem with the price of electricity after the blackout or during the blackout. There is a cap in the state of Texas about how much you can sell or offer electricity for. No such thing really exists in the state of Texas for natural gas, even though these two commodities, if you will, are inseparably linked with each other in our energy system. So these all do present continued challenges. You mentioned the reality of extreme weather, and this is one reason I was so excited to have Dev here. I don't know if you could, we hear a lot about the science of this, and I know that the science is ongoing, but if you could try to paint a little bit of a picture of the link between climate change and extreme weather events. I mean, it feels to me like, as somebody who pays attention to things, like it is, I'm watching it happen. It feels that way to me. But I don't know where exactly the science stands.
Yeah, I think the whole issue of unprecedented becomes a factor when we start thinking about how the climate is changing. Why is it changing? Whether it is changing, that becomes a topic of debate for some other points. But the reality is, in the last 10 years or 15 years to 20 years, if we start looking at the number of events that have occurred and the manner in which their intensity, their duration, the frequency has changed, there is little doubt that we can just assume that nothing has changed. So the question then comes that given that there is a change that we are all experiencing, does this align with what the scientists have been saying with regards to how climate might change?
Okay.
So the mechanism is as follows. Think about it this way. When you have a change in climate, you essentially have more warmer air. When you have a warmer air, you have more ability for that air to hold moisture in it. This is one of the reasons that in winter, some places you put humidifiers because colder air just doesn't hold enough moisture in it. So when you have more moisture in the air, now you have the ability to hold more energy. Now that same air is much more energetic and it is packing much more of a punch when there is a perturbation, meaning a system that can create a storm. So what that does is the storms that were coming, say 10, 15, 20 years before present, they were strong storms, but now they are storms on steroid. Okay. And that's where they are affecting the system in a much more powerful way. Now, what happens in these extremes is at one end, you're going to get these big storms, and the other end, now you have more ability for that atmosphere to just hold that energy. And so there is a difference in the time when the next system is occurring. So you go through these wild swings of very wet, very dry, very powerful, very peaceful conditions going forth. And that is essentially the science, I would say, in terms of how we are experiencing the extremes. I call it, it's more like we just now have a bigger balloon all over us, and there's more water that has been held in it. And once you get someone to pierce it, you're going to just get a bigger rain than before.
I like that. I understand that there is kind of an evolving scientific understanding of, for example, a potential link between extreme freezing events, polar vortices, and like the one that prompted this event here in Texas 2 years ago. But suffice to say, this will require more planning around extreme weather when we talk about our energy system. And Erica, I think that's where you were going with this. Is there anything you'd like to say as somebody who, your thoughts on that? Or is it too broad a question?
No, I just.
I was worried I cut you off earlier.
No,
but,
no, no.
yeah.
I would, chime in that, I think we need to be careful, especially with some of the changes that are being looked at as far as trying to kind of fix the problem. And I think we need to really focus on what the problem is. And this, the musical entry into this event was brilliant, because one of the things to focus on was that beat. And that beat is what we're trying to help in our grid. And if legislators are passing rules or mandating certain types of revenue streams, we need to ask, what is it that they're trying to solve? What problem they're trying to solve? And should we be focusing on that beat, which is what this operational reliability is, what we've been experiencing in the last 3 storms for the last 3 years, and the one that happened over Christmas. We want intermittent generation. It's here to stay. It's a good thing for our consumers. We need to be able to have products in the market that will help generate, being able to allow those intermittent renewables to help us, continue adding energy efficiency, demand response, distributed resources, as opposed to just let's build 10,000 megawatts of steel and have it there sitting in the back.
And I want to let you. I want to let you in. I just want to make sure people understand. Intermittency is a question. I know. Maybe you could explain what that is as you. Yeah.
So I agree with everything Erica just said, but I want to back this up a little bit to talk about the broad system, electric system that we have. The intermittent resources are wind and solar, and they are weather driven. They are intermittent, but they are highly predictable. I mean, you know when the sun is going to shine, you know when the clouds are coming over, you know when the wind is going to blow, and we have highly effective forecasting, near term and longer term, to figure out what the wind and the solar patterns are. But because we have so many more extreme weather events driven by climate change, we have more droughts, we have more icing events, we have more bigger hurricanes, not more hurricanes per se, but most of the events that we have are much fiercer in terms of the condition of weather that we are facing. And we're getting more ice, we're getting more water-bearing hurricanes that are lasting longer, we're getting a lot more floods, we're getting a lot fiercer wildfires, and all of this is hitting more people across broader areas for longer periods of time. We did not build a grid to face these conditions. We built, none of you except a couple of you in the front row and me and my husband are old enough to recognize we built this grid for Ozzie and Harriet, and we're facing Mad Max. And even Mad Max is on AMC now, so I have to update this analogy. But the point is, all of the systems that we built, when someone says, we have all this coal and natural gas plants in Texas, geez, some of them were built in the Nixon administration.
Right.
A lot of them were. And a lot of, we've got power lines in this system that are 100 years old. We don't have, and nobody was designing these. We were designing these according to standards that were developed by railroad builders about weather conditions and icing in the 1900s. So we have not, until very recently, come to grips with the weather threats ahead of us, especially in Texas, where you're not supposed to talk about climate change in politics, and where no one is ordering at the Public Utility Commission saying, weather is bad, recognize it and build for it. The other thing is that let's understand that politically the game that people are fighting over today, as Erica talked about, is what's the generation that we need. But because of all these extreme weather events, 95, 99% of the outages that we face as individual customers are due to failures on the transmission and distribution system. Those are the wires. They're not because we don't have enough generation or power plants, whether it's wind or solar or gas or coal. We're failing because tree limbs are breaking under ice, or because pole-top transformers are dying under heat or under wildfire or hurricanes or tornadoes. Those are the reasons that we have a lot that why extreme weather driven by climate change is so dangerous for all of us. And our houses aren't ready for it either.
Can I just say one thing? Thank you for raising this issue about how the system and infrastructure has been based on information which is now almost archaic. And we are in a world where the past is no longer indicative of what the future would be. And I think this is where it is really important to highlight that climate research is not bad for the economy. In fact, climate research is what is required to sustain the economy. And this aspect needs to be brought in as we start looking at energy sources, at the infrastructure development, that when you're studying climate, you're not anti, you are with the growth. And I think this aspect, when we talk of options and solutions, would be a great one to proceed forward with.
I think I understand what you're saying. That the challenge becomes in a state that with such an important fossil fuel industry, certain sectors of the economy may still feel threatened by the need to reduce CO2 emissions, for example. I mean, for an acceptance and understanding of climate change is better for the world, but maybe not for individual interests that exist within the economy, more broadly speaking. That might be part of the challenge of us here in the state.
Right. Again, climate change, climate variability, extreme weather, very often we use them in the same sentence as I just did. And in reality, they are extremely different words and the terminologies. What we talk about with regards to climate change has two elements. One is the mitigation, where we are talking about reduction of greenhouse gases or looking for alternative means of greenhouse emissions and energy and so forth. But a second part, which is very important, and the point Eric also mentioned, is the whole role of how do you winterize, how do you come up with adaptation. Mm-hmm. And this aspect of how do you adapt builds on understanding the climate risk. Yes. Which is based on now and future, and not 1950 Aussie era.
Yeah. I want to get back to some of these questions of mitigation a little later, but a few of you, or two of you now, have made reference to what we're looking at here in Texas, right? Like, what are some of the proposals that we're hearing from our policymakers, from our lawmakers, to achieve better grid-wide reliability with I think the really important caveat that you mentioned about the fact that a lot of these outages are actually more local in nature. But as our lawmakers meet just down the street from us here, many of them are talking about, Erica, you mentioned this, building essentially encouraging the building of more and more natural gas power plants, more supply, more what they call dispatchable supply, meaning you can kind of press a button, and this is way oversimplifying it, but turn the power off and on to get it on the grid as needed. Is that, Allison, is that a necessary solution? Is that important
having dispatchable power plants, particularly spanky new, fast, flexible, low-cost generation, and particularly powered by natural gas, is necessary but not sufficient.
Okay.
We need, and we know this because gas itself has proven to be a weather-dependent resource in Texas. But we know that we need these fast, flexible plants to be able to come on very quickly to replace other plants that knock off a forced outage of a different fossil plant, or when you lose a transmission line, or when the wind dies down on the second or third day of a cold front coming through, or when the sun sets or a cloud cover takes over all of West Texas. We know that it is not rocket science to any of us that the sun doesn't shine at night. Thank you, newsflash there. But we do have more and more batteries being built across the entire state. We do have batteries that are going in next to that are called hybrids that are next to every wind and solar plant, and that are being spread more and more across the grid. And someday we will have geothermal resources, I hope, that can perform a lot of this same role. But so we need all of that stuff. We also need a huge amount of customers' energy efficiency, as I've discussed, to lower the amount that we consume at peak hours, as well as around the clock. And energy efficiency and demand response are lower cost than any gas plant that we can add, and they're actually lower cost than almost everything except new renewables. So we could be doing a ton of energy efficiency and demand response. We have a gigawatt or more of batteries on the hoof parked in people's garages across Texas. Someday we'll be using those as integrating part of the grid. So we need to be using all of these resources extensively, and we also need to be doing a lot more transmission building and distribution, rethinking how we use the distribution grid.
Yeah,
Erica, you can probably say some of that more articulately than you want to take a shot?
I was going to ask.
Great job.
Well, let me ask you this, Erica, and this is with the understanding that if we are all Austin Energy customers, we're also it's a publicly owned utility, so this is all our utility, and this utility operates obviously gas power plants along with many other things, and also has a stake in a coal plant. Is there a risk, Erica, if we build more gas plants now, at the same time as we're seeing a revolution in technologies, battery storage, and other opportunities to come online to supply power and balance power, is there a risk that we are, stuck decades out, as we might have plants from the Nixon administration now, with power plants that we built in this time of transition, worried about reliability, and now suddenly these things are essentially obsolete by the time that the children today are in college or what have you?
Well, I think you and Allison make a couple of good points. So one of the things we don't want to do is look backwards and try and solve this problem with an old world type solution, right? So base load natural gas plants. That they should be incentivized to come on to the system as opposed to being mandated and having a commission secure this revenue stream for these generators. Allison mentioned that natural gas dispatchable generation is important. It's an important part of our balancing our system, and it's what size? What's the right size of those natural gas generators? Do we need peakers? Do we need those smaller, more nimble type assets for that drumbeat? One of the things Allison also mentioned was our forecasts. I deal in those forecasts every day, and I wish I had an awesome forecast like you're insinuating. I think that, we don't know when the wind is going to drop off. What's interesting is that forever and a day, the summers used to be our issue because that's when we would generate the most revenue. That's when everything would be really, really hot. And, that's when we would kind of, we got to make sure we get through this summer. That's really not the issue as much anymore, even though we were off, ERCOT was off on their load forecast huge last summer. And not just ERCOT, a lot of loads across the state. But really what's turning out to be an interesting phenomenon is our winters. We're ready for those summers now. The sun our solar generation is coming online and is doing a wonderful job of picking up a big part of that market share in the generation stack. But it's not there in the winter. And the wind isn't there either. And so I think that's where, again, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And let's find products and tools that will address those issues and let that end user be part of that solution as opposed to coming in with a mandate that's going to have us build a lot of large generation that was built, 10, 15, 20 years ago.
I'm curious about you refer to products and tools, and Allison has referred to things like demand response, where we were able to lower our demand as needed if conditions become too tight on the grid. Things like energy efficiency, which is often considered the least expensive and the quickest to implement way of helping kind of bolster our energy system, and so many others. I think you mentioned distributed energy resources. are there technical challenges that we face to get this stuff online? I mean, how you talk to people who would like to see this become the entirety of the grid, essentially. How far away are we from that happening? Or let me just ask you if there are technical challenges rather than ask you that big question.
There's definitely
Yeah.
technical challenges. And I think, standardizing, another thing that Allison mentioned, getting standards across just battery usage. So then, we're interconnecting and able to communicate across systems with outside of different load zones. Those are some of the challenges. Trying to get the right programs that are meeting the needs of our customers, and then just the systems are getting there. But I would have thought it would have been here by now, and we're still slogging through some of that. Tesla is doing a great job with VPPs, and
What are VPPs?
I'm sorry, virtual power plants,
Okay.
aggregating
Right.
some of the different assets that our customers own and want to be able to provide to the grid. So we'll watch that very closely because they are a private company that can move 10 times faster than a public power company can. So we want to let those models start to come to fruition so then we can go ahead and adopt those for our customers as well.
So, quick poll, raise your hand if you have a smart thermostat in your house. Okay, keep it up if you actually are enrolled in the city of Austin or Encore. Good news. Good for you
Got a
guys.
few people here?
Thank you. You can put them down now. Okay, now raise your hand if you have solar. Electric vehicle. He's my husband. He's a ringer.
She plants him in the audience.
Or electric vehicle. Okay, so you all, everyone who raised their hands, you are part of when Erica talks about assets and aggregating assets energy to be able to do something on the grid. You all are part of that. But remember, by the same token, after Uri, if you looked at Twitter or you looked at people complaining about demand response and you ain't the boss of me, remember the come and take it signs where there was the Texas flag with a thermostat on it.
Yeah.
You're not the boss of me. There's no way I'm going to let you control my thermostat. That's the kind of really silly thinking that we have to overcome. And when Erica talks about we need programs that work for customers, we need to find ways to make it okay for you to feel good about partnering with Austin Energy or with some other energy provider to actually run your thermostat or your battery or your PV in ways that help the grid as a whole and that remunerate you, not just leave all of us in the dark. So that's why aggregated resources and virtual power plants are so important as a future thing. But it's going to be a long time before anybody other than Tesla comes up with a way for people to contribute their electric vehicle batteries for the good of the grid.
I mean, how long? I mean, I know that I started that
Too
question.
damn long.
because the answer you gave, Erica, made it sound like yes, it was challenging, but it was not. It sounded technically feasible that a lot of these things could be implemented. It's just a question of kind of cutting through the policy and
It's technically feasible, but
Yeah.
I think those are the kind of things we need to be working on as a grid operator, as a state, as a commission, so then we can come. I mean, we have a unique situation that ERCOT is all within one state, and we can do things. We're not stretched across other state lines and have these larger independent system operators or RTOs. So I think we need to focus on those kind of solutions. And I feel like the solutions sometimes that are entertained it's like an easy way out,
Yes, Dev.
I'm just going to say two things.
Yeah.
One is I'm really glad to hear of the confidence that is posed that we are good for summer, not for winter. I wish we have that confidence even when we have some hurricanes come by. And I'm not sure I'm going to be entirely without any power loss at that point. So I think the issue here is that it is always going to be, we are going to have some sort of a loss and feature. The issue is how do we fail safe? So failing safely is a really important aspect, that whenever risk will occur, there will be a shock that will occur to the system. How do we find a way that the system can reduce its load that you saw with the beats, but at the same time will start ramping up again. That's one. But the second aspect that comes up is that even though this can be achieved with all the investments that are going on in the grid level, our vulnerable communities are the most vulnerable, even more vulnerable under these conditions. And so then the question comes up, what do we do at that end mile in terms of where the transmission is occurring, that a consumer starts coming in, who can't afford these nature of storages, and what responsibility would we have as a community to make them more resilient? And that is where I think this issue of we could get climate or weather forecast in a regional scale, but when we start to develop this very localized information, which parts of the neighborhoods, which part of the communities really need support, where the infrastructure needs to grow, I think we need to invest a bit more along that end too.
And this is, thank you for bringing that up. This becomes even more important because one of the saddest ways that Texas load has grown by 17% in the last decade. Yeah. That's a lot. And one of the reasons, and we can't just blame it on Californians and crypto miners. It's all of us. But the problem is, the reason it hasn't grown more is because electricity is now so expensive that over 40% of Texans are living in energy poverty or energy insecurity, which means that they are doing two important and painful things. They are using portions of their family budget. They are not consuming enough food. They're giving up on food or medicine in order to pay electric bill. And they are setting their thermostats at unsafe levels in extreme cold or extreme heat. Yes. Because they are worried that they can't pay the bills. And what that means is we have the worst kind of energy conservation. It is conservation that's hurting people and that's hurting families. So affordability is a problem that exists today. There are 33 million Texans, and 40% of them are living in energy poverty. That is wrong. And so it's not, and we know that in heat waves and in cold spells, people are dying. You've documented that fabulously, sadly. And so this is one of the reasons why stuff like energy efficiency is so important and why it is so crucial that we are underfunding it to such a dreadful degree.
And I think that it bears just underlining that this is the reality now. All of these solutions that we've talked about, maybe especially some of the big picture, like build a whole fleet of new power plant solutions, it's only going to increase that price tag, right? So people are already in trouble trying to pay their bills, and a lot of what we're looking at as a state right now would likely exacerbate that. Any answers, Erica? You work for a utility. I mean,
well, I mean, what I would say is, like you said, it would just exacerbate that price tag, and it takes away the ability for us to focus on emerging technology. That's where we should be spending our time. And then, here, to address I shouldn't say address the affordability question, because there's a lot of different methods that, we use to be able to help the part of our community that needs that assistance, that wants that security, that needs that security that we want to provide. Anything from resiliency hubs, our sustainability office is working on those kind of resiliency hubs to set those up throughout the city, so then people have places to go. We have different types of programs, but that's just addressing the situation right now. We need a larger solution that's going to help anything from, we've changed building codes back in 2010, 2008. The load growth and I'm giving you an example. So the load growth that Allison talks about throughout the state, we haven't really experienced that here in Austin as far as electric revenues are concerned. And you say, oh my gosh, I see so many people moving to Austin. But because of the way that we have required people to build in Austin, it has really reduced the demand of energy across our system. So these are all the things that we need to be thinking about and looking at to try and minimize the amount of demand coming on the system and making that demand more efficient so our customers can afford it.
And Austin and San Antonio are rarities in the magnitude to which they have made commitments to energy efficiency and to limiting and strategically managing electricity demand growth.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting beat that I have because I hear a lot of really compelling and often convincing solutions to the challenges that confront our energy world. And I think a lot of people in the audience and myself too often hear these things and then they just wonder, well, why aren't we doing that? I mean, energy efficiency seems like saying there are other states that do it much better than we do. Is it just a question of this state being so focused on selling energy supply? I mean, is by virtue of us being, this energy powerhouse, first with oil and gas, now more recently with renewables? I mean, like, it's great to have good ideas, but why? Where's the holdup?
I think Allison stated, we need to, we have, sometimes we think about things the way we've done them or have had them in the past. So we've always been a very energy-rich state. We've always had plenty of gas. We've always had, why did renewables come here? I mean, not just because of the tax credits, but because we have so much land. We have, such a great array, 800 and what, on 900 miles wide, 900 miles long. And so we have all these wonderful natural resources that we've been leaning on for so long. And I think that, in watching all the testimony, you mentioned another thing, Allison. I think I started to hear climate change coming out of the out of the mouth of different legislators or commissioners, really late after, it took many months of watching some of the Uri to hear them start to use those words. And so I just think we need to catch up as a state and stop leaning on these resources so then we can, again, address the real problems that we have across the state.
It's a lot easier to go with a couple of simple answers and say, mission accomplished, I fixed it. But we know it's not fixed. We can't build gas plants real fast. Even if we do, it's not going to make climate change and extreme weather go away. It's not going to make poor people wealthy. And the next thing is going to break.
But I often remind people of an analogy I use, which is a hammer and a chisel. You cannot control the hammer, like the hurricane or the ice storm, but you can devise those chisels to take the impact away from the most vulnerable parts, whether it is a grid or the community or so forth. And I think the more, one of the good things that I see hearing is that, say, the partnerships I've seen between the University of Texas and the city or some of the communities that are coming forward. I mean, it's really localizing this global problem that climate changes, the impacts may be happening at a very large scale, but we can do something locally and work with the communities, work with agencies, and really come up with solutions which can become a template. And I think that meeting both ways in terms of how the grid is being designed, how the energy supply demand is coming up, and how we design an infrastructure which is much more resilient, including the social infrastructure. I think there we could start inching towards something which could be a win-win scenario going in the future.
We heard a reference to climate resilience hubs earlier, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of this is that if you it's almost like a shelter or something, right? I mean, if you have an energy emergency, in this case we're talking about, there's a place you can go where you can get electricity, warmth, and be protected from the outcomes of that power failure. What, Deb, I'm curious about in your research, you talk about social infrastructure. This might be one example of those things, but what else could we consider along those lines?
No, I think this whole issue of resiliency or vulnerability, I mean, we have Dr. Susan Cutter visiting us this week who has done tons of work on this topic. I mean, essentially it boils down to what we were discussing is this issue about governance. So what we have is infrastructure design. We have science being designed, and it is the delivery of this particular, whether it is in terms of creating the resiliency hubs or the resiliency concept, that needs to build up more. So it is not so much as creating the infrastructure and hubs where people will start coming, but even creating that confidence that we can rely on these systems in the time of crisis. And out of that, we can emerge back to resume normalcy That framework is going to require education, belief in science, and belief in the policymakers and utilities. And that together is, I think, where I would start looking at energy resiliency, community hubs moving forward. So this notion that this is going to be an infrastructure alone, I think we need to build up further going into the future.
There's a scientist named Dr. Kate Marvel has said the best places, the places that will best deal with climate change are the cities and states and communities that are willing to look it in the eye and deal with it, rather than the ones that you can't just say, I'm going to go here because less bad things will hit it. Everywhere is going to be hit. The cities where the leadership is willing to say, we need to work on extreme heat, we need to work on affordability, we need to develop resilience hubs and community shelters. Those are the places where we will all be safer.
I just, this is bringing me to mind of two experiences I had very recently. We were actually, my parents are in the audience here tonight, and we were having dinner a month or two ago, and there was a power outage in their neighborhood, and I walked outside, and around several houses around, these like Generac generators turned on. You know, these things that are automatically connected to the natural gas supply that allows for these houses to not run out of power. And that's great, and that's a fantastic kind of fail-safe, right? But it's the type of thing that you only can afford if you can afford it. And likewise, after the big ice storm just this month.
H-E-B and Buc-ee's.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Speaking of community resilience
yeah, there you
centers.
go. Right. Yeah. I mean, is this where is this where it comes down to? Walking around and hearing all these people running their generators, which they had bought after the 2021 storm. I saw it over and over again. People, and I'd ask them, when did you get this generator? I got it after 2021. What does that do to our sense of a shared energy system? Because a lot of what we've been talking about is almost a mentality shift. We need to get people on board with demand response. We need to get people on board with smart meters that will control things as are necessary. And to some degree, changing that mentality is more challenging than building more power generation, right? I mean, if people really don't like that idea, then how do you accomplish that? Take that and then consider that more and more people may feel that a shared grid is not, they don't have buy-in to it anymore, right? I mean, if they can afford their own to kind of protect themselves in these rare events of energy emergency, do they want to even make that investment? Is that one possible outcome of continued extreme weather and continued disruptions to the energy grid?
I think all of us are trying to toy the scenario in our mind. What might be a good way?
Yeah.
I think certainly, I mean, this issue, the question you pose, it's at so many levels, right? I mean, what is the role of a taxpayer?
Right.
What do you expect out of this community?
Yeah.
What do you expect out of the utility? Is it under a fair with a friend, or are you going to be counting on it? And how much resiliency is something we need to develop on our own rather than just relying on something else. But to me, it all boils down to one thing. I'm an academic. To me, if science tells me to do something, I will follow it. And so if I were to do something which is going to go in terms of solutions in the future, whether it is developing my own resiliency or the community resiliency or trying to look for a grid network, I will just follow science, whatever that may be. And making that science more palatable for everyone, including policymakers, to start understanding and building off that. That is where I think our biggest challenge is right now in terms of developing the path ahead.
We just need to add more drums to it.
I would like to believe that politicians pay attention to science, but I sadly don't think that just saying science, to quote most sciencey things, slower or more articulately is going to change many players' behavior. But I will, in answer to your question about are we looking at fracturing a two-tier
kind of like
system?
two-tiered system, yeah.
I want to draw our attention to the differences between California and Hawaii, both of which are on the leading edge of adverse climate change impacts. California worse than Hawaii, but both of them have gotten massive levels of investment in distributed assets like PV and batteries. And the difference between California and Hawaii is that in California, and both places have extraordinarily high electric rates, but in California, they have been implementing these in ways that are clearly creating haves and have-nots. In terms of richer people have more EVs in the car and PVs on the rooftop. But in Hawaii, because it is smaller and coherent islands, it's like the old, united we stand, divided we hang. Everybody feels that the Public Utility Commission, the legislators, the governor, the utilities are all acting in ways that try to make sure that everybody has a piece of the solution, that everybody is getting a lot of energy efficiency, that they have a lot of community solar and rooftop solar, and that pushes down to everyone across the community because they know that they can't solve this on their own, and the rich people can't wall themselves off because these islands are so small. Whereas in California, they're all, behind a gated communities island. So there's an important difference there that I don't think, for the near term, I think ERCOT's going to be a lot more like California than Hawaii, unfortunately, until we have technology and economics get us to the point where we can deploy even more managed distributed assets in ways that help people.
We have several minutes left, and I did want to allow some time for audience questions if they, if there are any outstanding. Is there anybody here who'd like to pitch a question here to the panel? I mean, yeah, I think we have a. Oh, hey, is that your husband back there?
Plant a question back there.
I won't stop you from asking, but we should have a disclaimer here. This is Allison's husband asking the question.
So the question I have, and if you want to add to it, has there been any legislation proposed or anywhere close to being worked on in Texas to go into that energy efficient world, to use some of the monies that supposedly we have to do something about that?
There's a couple bills.
Okay.
And in the House and in the Senate, and historically, energy efficiency legislation in Texas doesn't go very far.
No.
So the answer is yes, but.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember following this during the session right after the 2021 winter storm and seeing efforts to try to get some type of energy efficiency goals reinstated, and for naught. It didn't work out then, when there was an even greater sense of urgency around these things. The Public Utility Commission was asked to increase energy efficiency standards over this last summer. There's a petition put to them, and they declined, but kind of opened up a. They have one commissioner now looking into it, essentially. Make of that what you will. There was some pressure put on that agency, and I guess that they say they're looking into it. Anybody else? Yes.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about the climate disruptions to the grid, but I was pondering that you made the point that we've grown 17% in the last decade or so. What we haven't talked much about is the millions of people pouring into Texas and just the growth of base demand. And I'm sort of confused as to whether or not the new technologies that are coming on can satisfy just the basic growth, notwithstanding, everything else we're trying to solve with around the climate.
Great question.
We cannot build our way out of this fast enough. That's why energy efficiency is so essential. And that's why it's so important that Texas building and appliance standards are not at the head of the pack relative to other states. City of Austin and San Antonio are way ahead on building standards. Almost nowhere else is. And 50% of our summer and winter load is driven by weather-related, temperature-driven demand for heating and cooling. And when you have 60% of the state that has poorly insulated old homes, that's why. So we could be buffering that load growth by doing two things. One of them is massive amounts of energy efficiency, and the other one is shutting down crypto. Because those guys are driving up demand, and then for all of us, and raising prices for all of us, 100 megawatts, 200 megawatts at a time. And then we have to, so first we all pay because they drive up demand higher, so they drive up electric prices higher. And then guess what? We have to pay them to shut down because of the demand extremity that they have created. So they're making money coming and going, and we're the ones paying the price.
There was an interesting.
I've just created a war. I'm going to be like,
This is.
they know where I live, and they're going to come get me.
Yeah. There was a UT-sponsored debate about essentially, cryptocurrency. Could it help the grid? Could it hurt the grid? And it took
All of the above.
Yeah, it happened to take place the very day that there was that big implosion for, I'm blanking on the name now, but SPF, and it all seemed pretty. Sorry. But to your question about, I thought that I really appreciate you brought up population growth, and it's just another level on this whole thing. We're talking about aging infrastructure, we're talking about reliability, we're talking about new technologies, we're talking about climate change. Add to that, absolutely, increase in the population here in Texas, for sure. I think that Erica's point earlier speaks to this, just as Allison kind of alluded to. One place so many people are coming to is right here in Austin, right? And we have, I don't know, what you were saying essentially is that we have instituted some efficiency standards here that help to at least cushion that, right? Mm-hmm. Anything else that, I don't know, you could look at Austin as a kind of microcosm, but what else can you do to soften the blow of that increase in population and the increase in demand that would come, along with it?
Samsung went to Taylor, so there's one.
Well, there you go.
But no hard feelings.
Yeah. So this is, I think the point.
If I can add,
go
thing.
for it. Yeah.
One of the studies that we have been doing has been how should we design future cities?
Okay.
Precisely for this nature, that the manner in which cities have been designed the last 50 years and so can't be the ways we can design the cities for the future, because the whole thing is changing. I'll give an analog of cars. If you look at your cars, and I often talk about it, a Hollywood movie, 1950s, 1960s, you can have the person sitting down, rolling down a window and driving away. You don't get cars now without air conditioning in them. You have some sort of thing going that is energy efficient built into that system. We cannot design cities that are built in the same thinking that we are going to get everything naturally. We need to create our cities which create their own climate and their own climate resiliency. And this is where I think the whole notion of how energy comes in, how energy grid is transmitting the energy, and how we meet the population demand all starts coming together. And we are becoming the hub of technology globally. This is where I think we can do it. But what we really need is to start thinking cities in a smarter way than just saying we want smart cities.
Yeah. Yes, a question? Yes. Maybe if you wouldn't mind getting a microphone, because we are trying to broadcast this as well.
Hi, thank you for speaking with us today. I have a question I'm thinking about, and it was sort of mentioned earlier, like language access to these conversations, right? And you talked about mentality, and I think a lot of that has to do with language access too, and how to access different communities. And I'm thinking more specifically about my own family. I come from a Spanish-speaking family, and I'm wondering, my question is, where are the resources, or where can I look to share this information with them, right? Even this conversation itself. So, yeah, just something to think about, right? Because I lived in Portland about 2 years ago, and with our Spanish-speaking community there, we often talked about olas de calor, so the heat waves. And it was really interesting to me that that was a term that was very well known already, right? People were already preparing for that. So I wonder, like, how can we bring that to our communities here who are not predominantly like English-speaking communities, right? Because, Texas is becoming more and more diverse.
I know Austin Energy through our communications team. They work with they anytime that they post anything, they're always looking to post it in more than one language. I mean, typically Spanish is the first one that it's translated to as far as reach out is concerned, but it's even growing as far as that not only being the only language, but that is something that we pay very much attention to because. We have such a diverse community that we want to ensure that even the messaging that goes out for all of the storms. I mean, we have to make sure that we're reaching everyone and they understand what's happening. So that's something that we've been developing for some time.
I worked recently for a California utility that always got every piece of material went out in 23 different languages. And we were aggressively working a variety of social media to make sure that all of the messages and all of the preparedness and all of the warnings and all of the how to cope reached every community where they lived in the language that they needed through the ways that could access them. Texas has been aggressively anti-diversity and inclusion, and except at the local civic level, like City of Austin, appears to be relatively disinterested in doing outreach and inclusion in ways that facilitate your family and your community getting it, and that is deeply regrettable. Cities like Portland have been fabulous in terms of outreach and inclusion, and I don't know how to fix it.
I'll just add, I think your question is really important because it's not only about language. I think it is also about education. That how do we bring the knowledge we have, the information that is out there, that it is much more easier to grasp, and people can actually have a means to do some actionable outcomes out of that. And I think one of the core aspects of where we want to develop our understanding is to make things easy. I always believe in this notion of this, there's a nice book I like to read, the checklist manifesto kind of thing. Like if you're in emergency scenario, you just don't need to think. You need to follow a process. And I think what we are now getting into a world where those unusual scenarios are becoming much more normal, and we need to start developing such emergency plans that we have some response and guidances that are much more well known. And I think I really appreciate the question because it highlights the role of education in all of this, that we might keep doing all these wonderful things, but even events like this, where we are educating and working with the community to understand and communicate, those need to just amplify more.
And the value of community-based organizations that can reach their neighbors in ways that we here can't unless you invite us in, because we don't know where to go. We don't have all the language and all the access.
At the risk of, and I think it's offering translations and trying to do outreach with Spanish-speaking communities, something we've done here at KUT as well with our online news stories and stuff, trying to reach people who will read them in Spanish. And I don't, and at the risk of sounding like I'm changing the subject, I honestly think if we're talking about emergency outreach on the part of maybe it's ERCOT, maybe it's your local utility, sometimes these things are still almost impossible to understand when they're presented in English to an English-speaking audience. I mean, like when you talk about, and I don't mean you, but when you hear your utility talk about something like load shed, but what they're really talking about is cutting power on the electric grid, right? This is a term they still use, rather than what anything people would really understand it to be, and that's because they are in that world where it's just the term you use. So it is a challenge, it seems, across the board, because I think that a lot of work could still be put into, especially when it comes to emergency communications and outreach. If you can't get it in English to that audience, I don't know how you're going to be able to do it for other people too. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay.
So, my language is important. For example, when I'm in my car, I don't have access to the radio or anything. I can't hear that. Mm-hmm. It would be nice if we could have a universal design for everyone to be able to see, like a hologram. I mean, that's really a futuristic idea. But anyway, if you just take that idea. And then also 3 years ago, I was training deaf children in renewable energy and teaching them how, snow can really, hang on 1 second. I'm sorry, okay, how the climate can really cause issues because of how, we're not keeping the earth well. We're using a lot of fossil fuels. And it was easy for the children to understand why we need to transition over to more renewable resources. And that was 3 years ago. And then, 2 years ago, we experienced that big freeze. And they were able to see, right in front of them what we had just been talking about the year before. And so they asked me, why does this keep happening more often? We figured out what the problem was a year ago, and for the next year and 2 years from now, soon they're going to be in high school, then they're going to be in college, and it's the same issue, and we're looking for improvement.
We'll hire them.
Great idea about the universal symbol. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Erica, get to work. Actually,
Hire somebody from Star Trek.
Yeah, and I know that there are people watching online too. So if they weren't, just to let people understand that we were getting someone speaking over here, but our audience member was asking the question in sign language, talking about reaching out to the hearing impaired community, and so I just, in case, because this is going over the internet too, I just wanted to make sure that was understood. I think that's a wonderful idea to try to find new ways of reaching your community.
You guys
as well.
have a communication school.
Yeah, I
Get
know,
on
right?
it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's true.
It's leverage.
The question you ask about why we haven't had more progress, I think, is something that I was trying to get to earlier as well. And there are clearly, political and economic roadblocks to a lot of these things. Even if people know the answers to them, that doesn't mean that they're always going to be quickly achieved, and that is exceptionally frustrating. We may have time for one more question here before we wrap, and I guess this will be my audience plan, because this is actually my father here in the audience. We're really keeping this in the family here today. Not intended, but yes. Yeah, go for it, Dad.
No pressure.
Yeah.
One thing that seemed to me got a lot of attention around the storm 2 years ago, and talking with Mose in particular, was that one of our vulnerabilities was that the Texas power grid is not connected to power grids of surrounding states and regions, and is that still viewed as problematic or something that should be changed? I don't believe it came up in the discussion.
No, we didn't touch on that, and I would be curious to hear what Erica thinks about this, because I remember you saying something in another event that we were at once that was interesting to me, that just go, but yeah, I don't want to.
Just real quick, yeah, there's a plus and minus there. You know, it's a trade-off. We during the ice storm, Uri, that one, it came all down the center of the United States, and being tied into SPP, which is directly above us, wouldn't have helped us. It would have hurt us actually. You know, we have DC ties, so we do have transmission that goes between the western and eastern grid at times. There's 5 DC ties. We're looking at a 6th. If we are interconnected, we will be under FERC. We're not right now. So again, there's goods and bads. It's a trade-off. So, but I think you might have a different perspective.
When Erica says we would be under FERC, that means that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is a federal regulator, could, in principle, declare that it has jurisdiction to regulate the Texas wholesale electric market. In fact, decades of FERC chairs have said explicitly, including the last FERC chair, they would not choose to exercise jurisdiction over Texas. And therefore, the Public Utility Commission could remain in charge of what happens inside ERCOT. And trust me, it's fun to be in charge of what happens inside ERCOT. Been there, done that. And Erica mentioned that during Uri, being connected to the rest of the grid, whether to the west or the north or the east, would not have helped on one day of Uri. But the fact is that interconnections, large interconnections of transmission aren't just a one day or a one event thing. They are 24/7, 365 for the next 100 years. And what that means is, had we in fact gone dark, had a grid-wide collapse during Uri, we would have desperately needed interconnection to the other rest of the grids to be able to black start and bring it back in weeks instead of months of outages. And if you look at the amount of wind and solar energy in Texas and more, and potentially more of those sweet, sweet gas plants being built, we would end up with a massive export opportunity. Yeah. And overall, I think Texas would make a lot more money out of interconnection with every other place, large interconnections, than we would lose money. And I don't think there's any significant risk of losing significant jurisdiction. So I think if we had several major transmission interconnections, we would be much, much better off. Because as I said, we cannot build our way out of the current load situation, load growth fast enough. We can't build enough gas plants and new transmission to keep up. So the more we have interconnection with others, I think the better off we'll be economically and reliability.
There's sort of a go it alone, Lone Star State mentality that is an obstacle.
Absolutely. I mean, you can never go wrong betting against Texas jingoism. But I think that in the case of running an electric grid, weather systems are much bigger than Texas. And we need as much help as we can get.
And this is a state, mind you, that is still having trouble with energy congestion within the state. I mean, so we still have a lot of bottlenecks in our electricity system inside Texas. So it's not just a question even if we can't start to, we're trying to address it, but, if that's still a problem, you can imagine the difficulty of reaching out.
So we basically had, the power line that transmission, they want to privately build a transmission line that will take power away from Texas. And that got voted down. Mm-hmm. So we do have a lot of congestion in the state, and, we do build transmission. We built CREZ. We built a lot of transmission to be able to move the renewable around. No doubt about if we had more market to send these renewables to, it would help the state as well. But another thing that we're doing is using batteries to be able to help us with that congestion as well. So I think one thing to take away is there's not one solution to these problems. We need to put our eggs in a variety of baskets and use more than one tool to be able to help the situation.
I'd love to talk about this longer. Because the sign of a good conversation is that you want to keep having it, but right now, I think we're going to have to say goodbye because we're at time. Thank you all very much for joining us here, and thanks to our wonderful panelists for this enlightening conversation. Thanks.